Good evening, everyone. Thank you again so much for joining us. Welcome to our webinar, Transcendent Faith, Embracing Diversity in Gender and Spirituality. This webinar is an affirming conversation about lived experiences of transgender people, their spiritual gifts, and the blessings to be found in ministry. Our guest speakers this evening are Maxwell Kuzma and Sister Luisa Derouen. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself and also CTA Metro New York. My name is Teresa Thompson. I am a board member of CTA Metro New York, and I will be the moderator for this evening. CTA Metro New York is the New York City area chapter of Call to Action, a progressive organization of lay Catholics challenging our fellows and our faith leaders to act for justice and to build inclusive communities. We affirm the theological thinking of the Second Vatican Council and support a church that is fully inclusive of LGBTQ people and divorced Catholics, and affirms the leadership of women at all levels, including the diaconate and the priesthood. We abhor racism in all its manifestations in church and society, and we decry the culture of clericalism that pervades our church and encourages clergy at all levels to monopolize decision-making. We enthusiastically affirm Pope Francis's prophetic encyclical, Laudato Si', which sets out clearly our moral duties to preserve and enhance our common home. CTA Metro New York's webinars in recent years have included our 2023 webinar on the German Synodal Way and our 2021 webinar on Black Wall Street and the Tulsa, Oklahoma race massacre. Next month, we will be hosting our first in-person event since March 2020. So we're very excited to host an in-person event again. On Sunday, April 14th, we will be hosting a mini retreat with Father Ann. That will be in New York at 20 Washington Square, New York, 10011 in the West Village. It will start at 2 p.m. Father Ann is a female Roman Catholic priest and advocate for women's ordination in the Catholic Church. Her retreat promises to be a special opportunity for spiritual growth, rejuvenation, and connection, which we need now more than ever as we come together post-pandemic. I'm going to put the link in the chat now in case you would like to learn more or to register and join us. All are welcome. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our guest speakers for this evening. Maxwell Kuzma grew up Catholic, was homeschooled throughout high school, and then went to the Franciscan University of Steubenville. After working in conservative Catholic media for a few years, he left his Catholic job and started his gender transition at the end of 2019 and through 2020, moving to a farm in rural Ohio in 2021. Since then, he has written about his experiences of coming out as transgender and embracing an LGBTQ affirming vision of his Catholic faith for the National Catholic Reporter, New Ways Ministry, and Outreach. He was also quoted by the New York Times in an article about the Vatican and transgender people. Sister Luisa Derouen is a Dominican Sister of Peace and has been advocating and ministering nationally among the transgender community since 1999. She is a trained spiritual director and holds a BA in Religious Studies and a master's degree in liturgy. Sister Luisa is retired and lives in Central Kentucky. I'll turn things over to Max and Sister Luisa now, and after that, I will hold a moderated Q&A. If you have a question that you would like to ask Max or Sister Luisa, please use the chat function to message me directly. And if you like, you can set that up right now if you follow along my instructions. So to message me directly, you can go ahead and open your chat box The chat function should be available at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then once you have the chat box open, you'll see a little button that says everyone, to everyone. So if you click on that, you can scroll down all the way to the bottom to my name. My name is Teresa Thompson. So go ahead and click on that. And that way it'll be set up so that you can message me directly. Any question that you have for the moderated Q&A with Sister Lisa and Max. So again, to message me directly, go to the chat function. Click on everyone. And then scroll down to select my name, Teresa Thompson. I'll go over that again when we start the Q&A in case there's any difficulties. All right. And with that, take it away, Max and Sister Lisa. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you, Teresa. Could I remind everyone, please mute yourselves. That would help us a lot if everyone is muted. It's wonderful to be with you tonight. Max and I are so grateful to be here, especially Max as a young, very talented transgender man. So we're going to start tonight, and I'm going to ask some questions of Max. And then after a bit, he will ask some questions of me. That's how it'll go before we go to some Q&A. So to start off, Max, I'm so grateful we got to meet each other in person last summer and got to give you a real hug. But let me ask to start off, I know from hearing your short biography and learning a bit about you last summer, you grew up in very conservative Catholic communities. How did you learn about LGBTQ people in those communities? And particularly, how did you come to learn about your own identity?
Thank you, Sister Luisa. I am very excited to be here and very excited to be sharing my transgender Catholic experiences with everybody. I know that it's a hot topic in the country right now and just something that not everybody knows a lot about. So I'm very excited to be able to share with you all. And to answer your question, I would say that when I was growing up, it was in a very conservative Catholic environment, as you said, and I just didn't have exposure to LGBTQ people in general. I don't think I really even knew like about transgender people until probably late high school, when I happened to stumble across YouTube videos where I would see people documenting their transition. And that's where I like first even discovered that transgender people could exist. So it took time for me to learn some of the fundamentals, like when you're born, the doctors are like, okay, this is a girl or this is a boy. But as you grow and you develop your personality and you come into who you are, there may be a difference between what is happening in your body and what is happening in your brain. And so I learned about that. And as I saw the example of other transgender people sharing their stories, primarily through YouTube was my first touch point, I started to be like, oh, I'm identifying with this. I am seeing myself in here, to the point where I actually had to start looking for, because I didn't want to transition. I didn't want to enter that world. I was, that was so different from my world. I was looking for reasons. Oh, I don't agree with you on that. I don't agree with you on the, okay, I'm safe. I don't identify with that part. And so it took me time to come into the understanding and acceptance of myself. And that process happened at the end of 2019 is when I first started to, having gone to therapy and having spent months talking to a therapist about everything. That's when I sort of started to start the hormone treatments and started to socially transition as well. And it was through that process that I came into myself in a way that I just didn't know was possible before. I didn't realize that I was not myself in all these interactions and all these relationships that I had. I didn't realize that it would, stepping into my identity would allow me actually to connect with people so much more. Like that was the big aha moment, you know?
Max, could you just say a little bit about what social transitioning means?
Oh,
Just
yes. Yeah, definitely. So social transitioning is when you choose to maybe change your name or change your pronouns. It could be either or both. And so you go from, I went from living a life with a female name and using female pronouns. And then I started to ask everybody, okay, I am now in the process of transitioning, socially transitioning. And I would now like to use the name Max, and I would now like to use male pronouns.
thank you. Yeah, continue with what you were saying. I just wanted people to really understand that part.
Yeah, for sure. So I really just started to come into my own. And once I started to feel comfortable as myself, not feeling like I had something to hide or it was like I would, all my friends, after I went to college, everybody was getting married and starting their lives, and everyone was kind of looking at me like, what are you doing? Like, what's up with you? And I always felt like I just wasn't able to connect with people because I knew there was something up with me, but it wasn't something I was just going to be like talking to people about. And so that the real profound change, I guess the thing I really want to communicate is that being able to be myself as a transgender person has allowed me to be able to connect with people in a way I just never thought I would ever have in my life. So it's been a profoundly meaningful thing, socially connecting, community, and of course personally as well.
You know, that's such a familiar experience, Max, that I've heard so many times, that when you are not being who you know yourself to be, even though for a long time you couldn't name it, but you knew it, you couldn't really connect. And that was a significant change once you claimed and understood, this is who I am. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you
Yes.
can also, it also really allowed me to step into things like discernment, being able to actually feel connected to the Holy Spirit and connected to God in a way that I just never knew before, even though I really did pray. I really did study all church teaching. I really was in love with my faith, and I just didn't know it could get way better.
Yes. Yes. So after transitioning, your relationship with God really did grow a lot. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that some more, because that's definitely at the heart of what tonight is about, is spirituality. So YouTube was kind of crucial for you to learn about it, because you were in such conservative communities. You transitioned then really in a rural area, and during the pandemic, that had to be extremely hard. What has it been like since then to connect with a support system? How did you build a support system?
Yes, I did kind of gloss over that part. Um, I'll start with the pandemic part, and then I'll move into the now part with the rural community in that part. So I just think it's very interesting to have transitioned during a pandemic because um, we spoke about the social transition, and the social transition is often very difficult for a lot of people because you cannot snap your fingers and instantly look different and instantly sound different. So part of the social transition is people walking with you as you are walking into yourself in a way. And so it was very interesting to be transitioning and going through this, awkward growing stages kind of in a private and hidden way because of the pandemic. I also do want to note that I did lack the support of my immediate family. And so that was probably the most challenging part, because, you know, those are the people that you really want to be with you. Like, for every endocrinologist visit that I had, meetings with doctors and surgeons, I really wanted my parents to be there. Even if they didn't agree, you know, with my decisions, I still would have, like, even if they straight up said, we don't agree, but we'll still go with you, that really would have meant a lot to me. So I just wanted to touch on that because obviously that is a big, big part of it. I
So
was
they
very
did not, Max, is that what you're saying? They really, we don't accept this, we don't agree with this, we're not gonna cooperate or in any way.
right, exactly. However, I was lucky that my whole extended family, which is actually quite large because both of my parents came from Catholic families who had lots of kids. So I have lots of cousins and aunts, and uncles, and they all are very supportive. And that support really has meant a lot throughout the whole transition. And that's really what got me through, those early days in the pandemic, was knowing that I had this network of family support and Catholic family support too, specifically. Like that meant a lot. So that's kind of how that phase went. And then I'm trying to think, when we moved here, to this rural part of Ohio, so that was interesting because then now suddenly I am a different person. So I didn't have to have this, like, you know, because by the time we moved here, I already had facial hair, my voice was different. So all the people that I met here, they just knew me as I am now.
So talk a little bit, a couple of minutes about, you know, you talked about social transitioning, but now this is medical transitioning, hormones, that you had a beard. So when did you start? When did you start that?
Yeah. Yeah. So the hormones I did start at the end of 2019. And so those were changing me throughout 2020. I had top surgery, which is, I don't know how explicit to be here, but it's so that I could have a flat chest. That was it right before we moved, actually, the summer before we moved here. So those medical parts, took time. When I it took several months of injecting testosterone weekly for my voice to drop, and then it took, you know, longer for my beard to slowly grow in. We're hoping that it keeps going. I want to fill in this part right here. But yes, so yeah, so then when we moved here, I didn't have to socially transition once we moved here because everyone I met just already knew me. The challenge was whenever you move to a rural area, you start to see maybe more conservative flags around, and when you are part of a community like the LGBTQ community, that might make you a little bit uncomfortable. And so I had a little bit of a learning curve in, okay, I want to be myself. I don't want to hide the fact that I am part of this community. I want to represent this community because that's important to me. I also have to consider safety. And so I have found a way now where it's, my philosophy is I am not hiding that I'm transgender. It is information that is available about me on my Facebook profile, which all of our neighbors use to talk and connect. It's also, you know, available on the internet and other places, but it's also not something that I necessarily lead with. It's not something, I'm not going to be like, hello, everybody. I'm transgender and you need to accept me into this rural conservative area where we shoot guns for fun and etc. So that part has been interesting, but I have found that there's a lot more acceptance, in this area than I would have thought at first. For example, we have one gas station in town because we're that small in this area. And one of the people that works there is a lesbian who's married to a woman and they have a baby. So that's an example where, you know, if it was a hateful town, they wouldn't be able to just work there in peace. But it's one of those things where, you know, it is so small that we're all family. And so working together and being part of the whole group is more important than loudly, boldly proclaiming political opinions.
But Max, let me come back to the faith dimension.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how the Catholic faith played into your transition. Just name, if you can, briefly, some positive ways and some negative ways that Catholicism, that your faith shaped how you transitioned.
Definitely. I would say for the negative side, I think it's mainly what I found when I would Google the words, Catholic and transgender or Catholic and gay. There were a lot of things I found that were not reassuring. A lot of stuff like conversion therapy or people pontificating about, why the LGBT community isn't Catholic or shouldn't be included. Incidentally, that's one of the reasons why it's important to me now to be open about it and to talk about it, because I want there to be examples for other kids or other young people who are exploring or looking. But as for positive things, I think it's almost limitless, because from a theological perspective, because it's God made us all uniquely for a reason. Like, we are all gifts to this world. I don't know how it could not be. That diversity is something that God wants, and that makes a difference makes everybody better. When somebody is different. I mean, you see this in nature. When something is different, that's part of how evolution works. That's part of how new things are discovered. With human beings, it's a different perspective means we can learn something or learn ways of seeing things that we didn't have before. Yeah, so
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes. That thank you. That is wonderful.
Yeah. And the word that I come around all the time is embodiment. And that is something that I didn't truly know. I guess another word also that I just thought of too is incarnation. Being our physical body, the fact that we are physically here too. We're not just these souls floating around, like the good and evil on your shoulder or whatever. We are embodied, and we are physically here in bodies. And I think that transgender people as a whole really do have a lot to contribute, like I just said, from the diversity perspective, because we have just seen we have seen things from many different perspectives through our journey. So
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Thank
you.
So now I will transition to asking you some questions, because I know that you have done a lot of work with the transgender community, which just makes me so happy to think about. And so my first question for you is, how did your journey with transgender people begin?
It began 25 years ago. In 1999, I was ending my term as vocation director for my congregation and praying about where God was calling me next, what was coming next. And really, I have gay and lesbian people in my family, like we all do. And so I thought God was calling me to minister to gay and lesbian, but I didn't know any gay and lesbian people in New Orleans. So I started going to PFLAG meetings to meet some gay and lesbian folks. And right away, probably the second or third meeting, I met my first transgender woman, who is Courtney Sharp, and she and I remain close friends today. And that was a new experience to me. So after the meeting, I said to her, I don't know anything about this. I remember saying, I don't know diddly squat about this. Can we get together and talk to me? And so the first conversation we had, she said to me, you get this, you get it. And most people don't get it. And she said, for many of us, this is a profoundly spiritual journey, but we don't have spiritual people who understand us to walk with us. so that was the beginning. And so then I got to know people in the New Orleans area. And then in God's providence, that was in 1999, the end of 2001, what is now called WPATH. It was Habigda at the time. Its international conference was in Galveston, Texas. So two of my trans friends and I drove to Galveston, and that's when my ministry became national. So that's how it began.
I want to ask, when she said it being a profoundly spiritual experience, how, like, what did you think? Because that was at the very beginning. Like, did that resonate with you? What came to mind?
Yes, absolutely it did. I mean, I'm amazed when I look back. I knew nothing, but the way it resonated with me was that she was describing, she had just had her surgery, and she was describing to me how that she herself, she knew how important it was, but she hadn't realized how significant and powerful it was until she had the surgery. And right away, I said, I'm not surprised that it was that powerful for you. I mean, here's me, I don't know nothing. And I said, I'm not surprised. I said, we don't have a body, we are a body. We are a body, and it's our body self. I mean, the fundamental spiritual question is, who am I? That's the fundamental spiritual, who am I? And so I really could understand right away that this is a profoundly spiritual experience.
I love it so much. My next question for you is, as someone who has had the opportunity to walk with many trans people now, looking back, I guess, what is something that you have learned or observed from this experience?
Well, a lot of things. I could say a lot of things, but I will just say a little bit. One is, being human is far more complicated than people think. Again, people think, okay, male, female, God made us, Genesis 1, verse 27, God made us. It's far more complicated than that. There are 5 components to determine a person's sex, not just 2, not just genitals and chromosomes, but those 2 plus external genitalia, internal genitalia, and brain gender. And so, as you mentioned earlier, Max, evolution moves toward complexity. Why should we be surprised that being human is a mystery? It continues to be and will always be. That's one thing. The other thing that really stood out a lot, and that stands out to me a lot in light of the many of these diocesan policies from bishops. When transgender people say, I feel like I'm a man or I feel like I'm a woman, they're not talking about an emotion. When we say the word feel, we think that means emotion. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel hungry. Well, that can change tomorrow. That's what the bishops are following. Well, this is just superficial based on feelings. No, when trans people say, I feel like I am, they are talking about a brain signal, not a feeling, not an emotional feeling. And that's really key. That helps a lot of people to understand. Oh, okay, this is not a choice. This has to do with the gray matter of the brain. Yes, so that was a very important learning. The most important is the spiritual process of transitioning. In many ways, it's very unique for transgender people. It's also unique individually. For each person, it's unique. But there is a sense in which it's the common experience of every human being who really sincerely wants to answer the question, who am I? To grow in who am I, we have different containers. There has to be a crisis. We don't grapple with who am I unless we're forced to. We would stay in a nice little comfortable place in our nice little image of ourselves, and we wouldn't grow if we weren't forced to by some kind of crisis, a death, a divorce, loss of a home, physical disability, mental illness, all kinds of things that are the container for how God helps us grow. For trans people, being transgender is the primary container for how they grow, as Thomas Merton would say, from the false self to the true self. That's the stuff of holiness. That's holy. It's a sacred journey, a very sacred journey. And so that process of transitioning is holy. And I tell trans people all the time, being holy doesn't mean saying a lot of prayers and going to mass. It means being true to who God made you to be. And when you are true to yourself, that is what gives God glory and praise. And that's what I have been privileged to witness hundreds of times, is that powerful, powerful process that is like many others, but very unique for each person, of coming into their own integrity and truth. That's the biggest thing I've learned.
Absolutely. And something that you said in your previous answer about your friend who, I think you said something along the lines of, she didn't know how much of an impact it would make, something along those lines. I was the same. I didn't mention this, but I had that same experience. It was always something is off, always something is not quite right. And I was thinking, well, transition feels like the direction I'm being called, so at least I'll try it. And I did not realize I remember distinctly one day, maybe about 3 months into having the weekly testosterone shots, I suddenly felt like good. I didn't realize that I could feel that like aligned, that embodied, and so I just wanted to pull that out, especially with the brain part, just not realizing it could be that good. I think that's a huge aspect.
Absolutely.
My last question that I have pre-figured out here for you is, what is one thing you wish you could say to cisgender people about the transgender community?
I'm not going to say just one thing, but I'm going to make it brief. But there's no way I can say one thing. Okay.
That's fair enough.
All right. So what I want to say to cisgender people, many things, as there are many things you would like to say too, but what we are experiencing in trans and non-binary people is one manifestation of God's extravagance in the diversity of creation. And that's what you referenced. How do we move forward? It's something new. It's a manifestation of God's extravagance. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And so God's image is deep and beautiful in everybody, and definitely in trans people. And so I want all cisgender people to know that, and to be grateful that you, transgender people, challenge and invite us to stretch our image of God. How we think of God, that needs to broaden. That's one thing I want to say to cisgender people. And so, following from that, transgender people are not a threat to us, but a precious gift of God. And there's a very significant narrative in our church and in politics that says trans people are dangerous and they are a threat. After 25 years, hundreds of transgender people, thousands of hours, I am here to testify to cisgender people. Transgender people are not a threat. They are a precious gift. They are a gift to us because all of you, for all of us, for everybody, it often costs mightily to live with integrity. If you're going to live your life with honesty and truth, it will cost. And trans people, because your living in truth is so external, it's visible, it's not hidden. You give powerful witness to the courage and the integrity and the wisdom that it takes to live in truth. And that's a great, great gift. Another gift that transgender people give us that I want cisgender people to know is that all people who live in a liminal space, all marginal people, and definitely trans people, experience life from a perspective that is crucial for the dominant group to have to grapple with. Otherwise, we remain in our blindness and in our own partial view of reality. And that's the gift that all people living in that liminal space, marginal groups, give to the dominant group, whether it's white men, whether it's heterosexual, whether it's whatever. We all need the other perspective to show us reality. And then another thing I want to say, this will be almost the final one, the harm done to transgender community comes primarily from organized religion. And so I want to say to all of us cisgender people, we who are on this call tonight, we are all people of faith. We have a particular responsibility to stand with, to speak up on behalf of trans people. And we have the responsibility to be informed, do your homework, learn, take advantage of opportunities, as all of you on this call are doing tonight, and speak up. Talk to your pastor, talk to your bishop. Don't let people talk about trans people and stay silent. Speak up, say something about this webinar. If you know a trans person personally, speak up, talk about them. Through my 25 years, one of the quotes that carried me through, that challenged me, that I struggled with, that carried me, was from, of course, our Dominican Saint Catherine of Siena. Speak the truth as though you have a million voices. It is silence that kills the world. Do not be silent. For 25 years, I have seen the face of God in trans and non-binary people. And what I've experienced from you, from all of you, has profoundly shaped who I am in God. And I thank you deeply. And that's what I want cisgender people to know.
That is so beautiful. I don't want to like I almost don't want to say anything else, but one thing did occur to me while you were talking about specifically transgender people as a gift to the church. I thought specifically of how we challenge the binary, how we challenge this idea of us or them, which of course is something that Jesus challenged throughout his entire life, and also something that is challenging to the human mind through the Trinity. You know, the Trinity being a great example of how it's not just two, it's not just this or that. There's a complexity there. So I thank you very much for your sharing all of that, because it's just so, it just means so much as a transgender person when cisgender allies do speak up, just as you said.
It's a privilege to know you, Max, and all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I'm really excited to continue to keep this conversation going with some questions from our participants here. I've gotten a couple of questions already, and I'll just remind those who may have come in a little bit later to access my chat, and I'm going to be the one asking the questions. You simply click on the chat button, which is likely at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then you'll see a little box that says "To Everyone." And then you click on that box and select my name, Teresa Thompson. I'm actually the host, so it might be at the top. And then that's the way that you can send me a message so that I can share your question with Luisa and Max. Okay, so I'll start with a couple of the questions that we've received already. This is a question for either or both of you. How do you respond to this saying that some people use to argue against transitioning? This saying of "God doesn't make mistakes." How have you approached that?
Go for it, Max.
I was gonna say, I want to jump in.
Go for it.
This is an example where, when I was saying earlier about when you were asking about negatives and positives, and I said, I just see so many positives. That is an example where I agree. I don't think that God made a mistake in making transgender people. I believe that we are transgender on purpose to share our gifts and share ourselves. I I don't know a stronger way to say it, because that is really my belief.
I couldn't say it any better.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see, I've got our next question here. This is a question for Max. First, there's a thank you for sharing your life tonight and for your visibility in our church. Franciscan University in Steubenville is not known for being LGBTQ inclusive and supportive, unfortunately. Can you talk about your decision to attend Franciscan University, your experience there, how those years affected your relationship with God?
Definitely. Well, I have to be honest that I think, well, I grew up in South Bend, Indiana area, and so Franciscan University was 6 hours away from home, and so it being far away was like definitely one of the big motivating forces in me wanting to attend there. I also had been attending high school retreats and youth groups that had leaders that were from the school. So at the time, this was I really had no sense of my own LGBTQ identity at the time. I just knew I really, really care about Catholicism, and, these important mentors in my life came from this place, so I want to go there. And it's actually very interesting because a lot of the people that I went to school with, I'm actually still in touch with, who have made similar transitions to being affirming. And I do think part of that is because a lot of the times the people who are like the most educated, the people who want to know the most about their faith, um, take it seriously. Take it seriously when it says, we're supposed to love everybody. And so yes, it was an interesting time in college. I was not in touch with my identity at that point. I was very focused on, since I can't do the same type of personal life that everybody else does, because that just doesn't resonate with me, that's repression. I'm going to throw myself into my career and into my studies. And so I was very busy. So I didn't really have time to think about, think about all those things. But yeah, I kind of got lost in my answer there, but that's kind of a picture of what it was like going there.
Yeah, thank you. I was really just struck when you were talking about how, as a teenager, some of these leaders in your communities were part of your impacted your decision to choose this as your university. And that reminded me of what you were saying, Sister Luisa, about how much our voices really matter. What could have it been like if some of these leaders had been able to express affirmation, had been able to, share this welcoming message. Yeah, so just thank you both for that again. A couple more questions here. Let's see. Okay. All right. So this is from someone who wanted to share about having a child who has recently come out as trans. And as parents, having a difficult time being understanding and supportive. Sisters talk about Sister Louisa's powerful testimony. While I believe the soul is genderless, how can a child feel that this physical body is wrong if God chose this body? Why would God put a soul in a body where it feels it does not belong? If there's anything that either of you could share on that.
I'm going to tag you in first, Luisa.
I mean, we're not, with our body and soul is not separate. I guess we've kind of grown up thinking that body and soul, our soul is somehow trapped in our body. The Celtic spirituality was that the soul surrounds the body, but it's all one. It's all one. You can't separate it. You can't separate body and soul. But for parents who struggle a lot with having a trans child, I guess is the assumption this parent is struggling with it from a Catholic perspective. Okay.
Yeah, there's kind of a secondary
Yeah.
ask. I'm not sure if this can be something that addressed, but
Yeah.
about resources specific.
What often is helpful to parents, I've discovered, is what matters most is you keep loving your child. No matter what, you love your child. God wants you to love your child. Your child is precious. And then I help them to understand, there are very firm church teachings about primacy of conscience and development of doctrine. And those are both extremely relevant in this context to help parents understand that what the church teaches changes. And as we learn more about the human person, the mystery of the human person, what the church teaches is going to change. And the way it changes, the way I describe for them how doctrine develops, it starts with human experience. That's the beginning. Theology is faith, trying to give faith an explanation. And so our experience is what starts. And then when our experience doesn't match what the church is teaching, as that's how the church teachings evolve, then the theologians pick it up and they grapple with it. And then it goes to the magisterium. But it can't make that process unless people are willing to live faithful lives, not in line with what the church is currently teaching. And that's hard to do, but that's fidelity. That is what fidelity to God looks like, is to stay faithful to God, even when it doesn't match what the church is teaching. But it takes self-knowledge. It takes self-knowledge to claim that. And primacy of conscience. It's very difficult for people to separate obedience to the church and obedience to God. Less so now than in previous years, but that's what I have found helps parents a lot.
I also do think I have had experiences of people asking me this question or telling me about a child or a young person, telling them as a parent or guardian about their transgender feelings, and from I've heard from their perspective of it sometimes being confusing, like, well, they want to identify this way, but then they like this, and that confuses me, and then this part confuses me. And I just want to say, first of all, that that's normal. It's normal, and part of that is a bigger topic of deconstructing what a gender role in society even means, because there are so many easy examples that we could just go down right now that are sort of like loose rules in society that don't apply even to cisgender people. Not every cisgender woman, wants to wear dresses all the time, wants to only do cooking and cleaning. There's the stereotypical, but those ideas get very ingrained. And so part of it, when young people and even older people, when you are trying to figure out where you fall in all of that, it can be confusing, because it can be like, well, I like a little bit of this and I like a little bit of this, and so I just wanted to say that I think that's a natural part of figuring out that big question that you mentioned earlier of who am I. Part of that is, okay, I only see these two tracks, and these are the two tracks that everybody wants me to fit into, but I'm seeing a little bit from here and a little bit from here, and I'm trying to figure out where I fit. And so not being so rigid when we are hearing that, not being like, well, if you're going to transition, then you can't like this stuff anymore. You can only like this stuff. Not being so rigid like that, and allowing that exploration and that curiosity, and honestly sometimes even allowing that curiosity in ourselves. Even for me, I am a very binary transgender man, meaning all of those stereotypical masculine things are mostly the things that I am drawn to. That doesn't mean that I can't do stereotypical feminine things or that I don't want to do them. There are some things that I am happy to do, but I'm just saying it can be complex, and that can be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Max, for speaking to that complexity. And thank you, Sister Lisa, for reminding us about finding God on the margins. That seems really, really relevant to today. Let's see, we're getting close to the end, but we may have time for a couple more questions. One here I have is for either, both of you. Do you think that we can be more involved in opposing kind of how the USCCB supports anti-trans bills, or help them to be more supportive in terms of understanding that this is a life matter, an issue of life and death? And what's the other part of this? Have you seen any difference based on the Pope's talk about accompaniment? Is that changing attitudes for Catholics at all?
I think it is. I think it is helping. Certainly, most definitely, Pope Francis has helped a lot. But what I'm also seeing is, with regard to the word accompaniment, it's being very misused in a lot of, again, diocesan policies. Bishops are talking about, we will accompany these transgender people, but what they mean by that is, we respect you, you are a child of God, but we know you better than you do. And so we're here to help you realize that you really are all wrong about what you think about yourself. You need to listen to us because we know better. So we're here to accompany you, do what we think you should do. That's not what accompanying really means. But yes, and I think that the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, the recent statement, it sounds so superficial at one level, but to say that transgender people can be baptized after having had surgery, they can be baptized and they can serve as sponsors. That in a sense, that sounds like a no-brainer, but it's extremely significant. And it's thanks to Pope Francis for all of that. Max?
Yeah, I think we need to be challenging the othering, this idea that transgender people are this special category where suddenly, yeah, that's how it feels sometimes. Like, so suddenly now we are having a spotlight on us. So everybody is a sinner, but we are like extra sinners. Like, so I think, yeah, in my thing is presenting who I am, sharing who I am. That's my sort of challenge to some of that stuff. I try not to keep up with it in too much detail because sometimes it's hard to hear dehumanizing language or conversations, but that's kind of my take is we're just other Catholics. So in that way, we need to just be brought in and be a part of things as everybody else is.
Thank you. Let's see, I think this will probably be the final question in the interest of time. This is for Sister Lisa. Have you gotten pushback from your religious community or your bishop, and how have you dealt with that, particularly when you began this ministry 25 years ago?
Well, when I began it, from the very, very beginning, my religious community was very supportive. Always, from the very beginning, knew that this is God's work, and that's what we are about, is ministering to God's people who are misunderstood and marginal. I needed to be under the radar, though. My community said that this is wonderful, you're doing God's work, but you got to stay under the radar. So I stayed under the radar for 19 years. But by then, transgender people were very visible. And then when they got into the sights of bishops, and bishops started saying things that were very dangerous and ill-informed, I knew I really could not stay hidden anymore. I just couldn't. It was compromising my own integrity too much. But my community has always been very supportive. Pushback from bishops, that has amazed me, actually. There has been next to no pushback. I was very much expecting it, and there has really not been much pushback at all. As a matter of fact, I have gotten quite a number of notes from bishops thanking me for what I am doing, but most of them are not going to say that out loud. But some do. There are some bishops who are now more and more speaking up. Certainly Bishop John Stowe, Archbishop Zinkula, forget his first name, Tom Zinkula. Yes, and there are others, but personally, I have gotten very, very little pushback from any bishops, which astounds me. Sometimes I think I must be doing something wrong.
You're doing
Thank
something
you.
very right.
Yes.
I think it's because I know why it is. It's because I stay in my lane, which is my personal experience of transgender people's spiritual lives. And who can dispute somebody's spiritual life?
Absolutely. That's very well said. I just want to say one final big thank you to yourself, Sister Luisa, and for Max. It has been such a pleasure having you as our guest speakers. And thank you all who participated for your attention and your conversation. So this talk is going to be made available on the CTA Metro New York YouTube channel. And we welcome you to revisit it there. Thanks again to everyone for coming, and we hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you,
Thank you,
Max.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.